Eisenman, Fred Thiel, and Chick Voorhees. Is there anybody that I missed? I'm not sure who 917 is. It could be just somebody.
I think that's
Will.
Oh, that's probably.
593.
Okay.
Wait.
All right.
Doris,
So-
did you get a link to Liz Vale? I sent her mine, but I didn't know if that was going to work.
Liz was here and then she was gone. So
Well,
I won't take it personally.
we have questions for her.
Montana is.
Hey, Chick.
So we've done consistency reviews before, and it's been pretty much sort of slam, bam, thank you, ma'am, and it was done and finished. I think this is weightier. I think I have more questions, and I'm not sure about the rest of the committee. I know that the final form, as I understand it, is still under review. So I think that that means that we can get through a lot of this, but I don't know that we have to feel compelled to sign off on anything here. If there's questions as to how some parts of the new overlay district might be eventually resolved. So I'd just like to tell that to my fellow committee members here.
Appreciate that.
I think that means like no pressure. And I have quite a few questions. I was very glad to get the map resolved because the map that came in our packet put a number of waterfront maritime activities in the resort motel district. And I had a heart attack that went on for several hours.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know.
You look amazing.
I know. And I called people and I got people riled up. So I had to backtrack on a lot of that because when I finally saw an accurate map, it was clear that the breakwater and et cetera, were just where they're supposed to be in the waterfront district. Kathy, how would you like to go through this? Do you have like an MO that you've thought about here?
Yeah, so I mean, the purpose of course is to just identify if there's any issues with the form that we had prepared. At this point, the local law is how it stands. That's what the Board of Trustees are reviewing. They might be making modifications based on input that they hear from the public. But as long as those items that change things are not inconsistent with the LWRP policies, I think that, it either could be, I know that this group has said in the past that if there are modifications that are more protective of the environment, that the recommendation for consistency with the LWRP stands. I remember seeing that in one of the recommendations that you had. Liz Vale, there she is. Okay.
Okay.
So what I would recommend is that, we work with the local law as it is now, with that something in mind, that if things that are added to the code that are more protective, that, this board says, look, we see that this could be tweaked, but as long as it's, more protective, then the consistency recommendation would stand. And that way you don't have to keep going back and forth.
I'm not sure that I can't speak for anybody else, and we haven't had side conversations. I'm not sure that I am comfortable with some of the heights that are allowed in the overlay district. Maybe I don't completely understand it, but it gives me some pause on some of the things that are mentioned here. So I think one thing we might do is just go through this kind of page by page and just, sort of indicate those things so there's no question about, fine, done, and maybe identify those things that I at least have some question about. And I'd like to have any other members of the Harbor Committee bring up any other issues that they might have, so we could be sort of going through this with that in mind as well.
So you mean page by page of the actual local law, Marianne?
No, I'm thinking of the consistency review, this.
Okay, yep.
That's what we're supposed to sign off on, right? All the yes,
So
no, not applicable.
There's the, exactly.
So, and then if there's questions that we have about it that refer back directly to the local law, I'm sure you'd be the person who could direct us right to any language there.
Okay.
Should
So do
we,
you want me to share my screen? And then we
Yeah,
can.
that would be great.
yeah, Mary Ann?
Yes.
A quick question. So as we go through this, should we just sort of pipe in, or do you want us to maybe just address very quickly up front what our principal concerns are? Maybe that's where we can spend the most attention.
Well, why don't you go ahead and do that? I think we should just go through it, soup to nuts, top to bottom.
Okay.
But I think that you have some overarching concern. I think you should, sort of summarize that. And then we can see how it ends up affecting different answers to the various
Okay.
questions.
I actually don't have overarching concerns. I have
Oh,
concerns that go to two specific issues.
Okay.
One of them, and they're not simple. I understand that, but one of them has to do with, I think, probably the most controversial part of this, which is the special use exception or special exception use that the trustees will designate certain projects. And then, and I want to understand that more. And then the second thing I'd like to have a better understanding of is how the WLNG site fits into all of this and why that site is included in the waterfront overlay and what the implications are for that kind of going forward. So those are my two areas of concern.
So one thing that I did not totally understand, and I have to, actually it was Susan Mead who made this connection for me. And she referred me back to the village code on the website that indicates it's this use chart for the various different types, like the code that we have right now. Liz Vale, you could be explaining this. You cut me off if I'm wrong, but I think it's like the same standard districts. It's resort, motel, office district, I don't know what it is, business district, waterfront, blah, blah, blah.
Residential R20.
Residential R20. And in the current code, and that's not going to be changed, it says what you can do in each of those various districts. So that applies, and Liz, maybe you can talk specifically to how that applies to the LNG.
Thank you. This is just an overlay district. So the waterfront overlay district is over all of the existing zoning that's already there. But how it relates to a specific property, it would depend on what they're applying to do there. What are you asking specifically? And quite frankly, I tend to advise boards not to discuss specific properties that could come before them as an application in the future, because you're expected to review the application when it's before you, not in anticipation of an application. I believe we are going to get an application from them, from Verizon, for that property. So I don't advise discussing it in detail. I think you'll have to review it when it comes before you.
So Liz, could you possibly get that part of the village code up so that people understand, like the way I do now, which I did not before, of the use chart, so that people understand how this works? I did not understand it.
I have it handy, so I'll share my
That would be
screen.
great. Could you just share your screen?
Sure.
The underlying uses are not changing. So
Yeah.
Right.
the underlying,
everybody,
this code is, this section of the code with all the underlying uses is not changing at all.
So can I stop you for a moment? Can you magnify this or whatever?
Sure.
Because I could not begin to read it.
So let's just start with the zoning map. Let's see.
Okay.
So this is the base map for this is your village zoning map.
Right.
It is slightly made transparent. But the purple here is the RM, Resort Motel. This pink color is your WF Waterfront District. The yellow is the office. The darker pink is your Village Business District. And then the R20 is everything else. It's sort of a beige on here. Oh, and green, sorry. The green is the Parks and Conservation.
Okay,
So each one of these districts has its own use table that goes along. What is a permitted use? That's the P. And then special exception uses, which are, that need to meet specific criteria to be permitted in each of those zoning districts. So each one has a column except for Parks and Conservation.
right. So it was extremely helpful to me when I understood the linkage there between the map and the districts and then this chart of uses. So in terms of, we're not going to discuss it specifically, but to respond to you somewhat, Herb, if we take a look at R20,
Right.
I think when you get down, Liz, can you expedite getting to transmission or blah, 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 towers, whatever, where that use is?
But that's the specific, that particular site. That application will come before you. There's an application for a proposed cell tower, and cell towers are permitted by special permit exception in residential zoning districts.
Can you
They are
just show that?
required,
Right. Can you just show that on that chart? That's all I'm asking.
sure, they're required to have village board approval by special permit.
Right.
Sorry, I'll
Subject
share
Are
to,
you
again.
back there? Can you put that chart up again?
It's right here. Yeah.
Right. So there it
It's
is.
special exception in any of the
Right.
districts that are listed here.
Right.
right.
And can you
just-
tell us what special exception is? Is that something that's only granted by the Village Board of Trustees?
No, so the planning board is the board with the authority to review the majority of special exception permits.
Okay.
It's just a list of additional standards that an application has to meet before it can be approved. And typically it's the planning board that reviews all of those. It depends on the municipality. Some municipalities, the town board or village board keeps that authority. Some municipalities, the ZBA reviews all special permits. Here, the planning board reviews the majority of special permits except for cell towers, which is reviewed by the village board of trustees.
Okay.
And this proposed 3,500 square feet of gross floor area for structures in the waterfront overlay district. They're proposing to have village board of trustees review that as well.
So
it'd
those
be
are the,
permits.
okay, so it's only those two instances that the Village Board is reserving that review of special exception for themselves, and then other special exemptions that are kind of dotted through that use chart could be Planning Board, ZBA.
Well, in this village, it's all planning board stuff.
It's all planning, okay.
Yes, and the
All right.
planning board still retains its authority over site plan. So even though the village board has to review a special permit for structures that are 3,500 square feet in gross floor area or larger, the planning board will still have site plan authority over all of those applications.
And is that true of a proposed cell tower, for example, hypothetically?
Yes, they still have to review the site plan for that as well. Yep,
And just to ask a question, I think I know the answer to this, but still subject to Harbor Committee review, setbacks,
oh, yes,
all of that. Yes.
Mhm. yes.
Okay.
All right. Can I ask another question along these lines in a hypothetical way?
Go ahead.
Because the waterfront overlay does talk about revised setbacks from, say, the mean high tide line or the mean high water line on specific sites. I think it talks about like a 30 or a 35-foot setback in the waterfront overlay. Does that supersede the
No.
underlying zoning?
Well, if it does, it's the stricter provision will apply. So it depends, what the underlying zoning district is. And it depends what that setback says. And so you would look and it would be the stricter provision would apply.
All right. And just another question along those
Wait,
lines.
before you go on, Herb.
Okay.
So Liz, let me ask you, so say in the downtown district, and I think this came up with our favorite topic, the condos, to what extent are grandfathered structures or structures that exist now, they were there before we imposed a 75-foot setback. To what extent is there a legal basis for being able, what is it, non-complying, pre-existing, or vice versa?
Pre-existing non-conforming structures.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit to us? And
Sure. So
How-
something exists prior to the code enactment or zoning code enactment that you have, it gets to continue under the law. It's constitutionally protected. It has private property rights attached to it, right, that are constitutionally protected, and you get to continue that pre-existing non-conforming setback, whatever it is, if the law has changed and it was already in place. If it gets demolished and they start over, clearly they have to comply with the law that's in place at the time that you're doing the proposed application. But if you have a pre-existing non-conforming structure, then you get to maintain it and continue it.
Okay.
Fred,
that-
interrupt me if you think I'm saying anything wrong.
Nope, we're on the same page. I mean,
Yeah.
usually what comes up with those is sometimes there'll be expansions to those types of uses, and typically if they don't expand, if they don't increase the nonconformity, that's fine, but if they do, they would have to go to the zoning board of appeals. That's the only thing I would add.
Yep.
And to what extent, like, we've seen this a bit, and I don't want to get too far off the topic here, but, you know, when you're talking about things being demolished, to what extent do they have to leave the foundation there and they can totally build the superstructure?
Yeah, that's you know, that's really an interpretation of the building inspector at the time it's being taken care of. Every municipality is different. I don't remember East Hampton was like one wall. Sometimes it's, you know, 50% of the structure. It depends
Okay.
what the building department is interpreting it as, I think. So
And we don't have like a common interpretation here in Sag Harbor?
I'd have to ask the building inspector what their feeling is on that.
Okay.
Liz, Liz, I have a question along those lines. If you have a pre-existing non-conforming building that is structurally incompetent and the client wants to bring it up to code, so to speak, a structural code, what are, you know, can they do that?
Which code? What are you talking about? Like bring it up to the
Well,
New York State building code or bring it up to the current zoning code? Of
Well,
course
if
they
you
can
have a
do it.
pre-
It's just if they'd want to, right?
Well, when you say if you demolish something, then you have to bring it up all to contemporary code, and that means setbacks, et cetera, if I'm reading you right. If you have a pre-existing non-conforming building that's structurally incompetent, in other words, is vulnerable, and the owner wants to bring it up to,
Usually you would,
introduce-
before you would demolish it, you would go in and get a permit to replace it and place it in kind, and you'd probably be able to. Yeah,
okay, good.
yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
so, anybody else have miscellaneous overarching questions that they'd like to air out here at the
I
beginning?
do.
Okay,
I've got questions. I kept reading about the 10-foot or the 15-foot wide pathway that has to be amongst buildings to keep a clear line of sight.
right.
But I don't understand, say, let's talk about, for example, like where Harbor Pets is and the liquor stores. There are houses behind that. So what if they want to build it up 3 stories? They can't put walkways in between.
Lily, just so you know, the visual, there's 2 separate things. There's a visual yard, which is required for waterfront properties, waterfront lots, which are lots that actually just front on the water. And this was specifically related to views of the water. And then there's the second, the actual public physical access as part of a 3,500 square foot application where we could get public access to a private piece of property.
So would you mind
so
putting
that-
up,
And incorporating a 10-foot, at least a 10-foot wide walkway to and along the waterfront.
But then
so
if they're
Kathy, would you mind, wait, let me just interrupt. Kathy, would you mind putting up the map and sort of showing where that siting
So
needs?
Lily, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that you were understanding the provision that it only applies for the waterfront. And yes, I will bring up the map.
Yeah,
which then leads me to my next question. So if you've got the pre-existing non-conforming buildings, I'm guessing that's like the Xavier building or Malloy's. That means if they're rebuilt or updated, they wouldn't have to allow access to the water. They could just continue as is.
they can continue as is, yes.
So if they were
but we-
renovated, they did new bathrooms and stuff like that, yeah, I don't think there's a
Yeah.
question. I think what Liz was telling us is that the structure is completely demolished, then there may be some effort to make it, the new structure, the replacement structure comply with the current zoning at that time. But there wouldn't be like visual access through those buildings. Correct?
I mean, if they were redeveloping the site, then yes, you'd have an opportunity to get the new standards applied to that site.
I think the new law will have the most impact if they're redeveloping an entire site. I really, to the extent that there's pre-existing non-conforming structures on the site, that they want to continue
Right.
those setbacks because they're so great and it was built before zoning, it's very unlikely that they would demolish and restart over to accommodate these accesses. It's only if there's a
Right.
complete new plan in place for development.
So Kathy, are you saying that it's only the first strip of structures that follow along the waterfront that are going to have the visual sightlines?
Yes, it's anything that is actually fronting on the waterfront, so all along the north side of West Water Street
Okay.
and Long Island Avenue. And
Well, but wait, what, Long Island Avenue, is that just one strip of, right there where you are, is that just one
Yeah.
strip of structures?
That actually, and those actually are included in the definition of waterfront lot because we included properties that front on waterfront parks as well, because we recognize that, the
Right.
views of the water across public lands are important from the street here, so.
Okay. So this is where the colors get tricky. You have the deep sort of pink, you have yellow, and then you have I don't know what that is. Is that resort motel or is that waterfront there?
This is resort motel in the purple here. It gets a little bit, because we had a little bit of transparency applied to this. I could probably bring up I don't know if I have it. Hold on a second.
And what is the little pie-shaped piece that's right next to it? And then the one that's right across the street? Is that waterfront or resort motel?
I'll come back. Hold on a second. Okay, so this is the official zoning map. It
No,
might be a little clearer.
Yes.
We don't have the transparency, right? So the purple is the resort motel. The pink, that's the WF district, and the darker pink is the VB.
right. So the place, if you go across West
This
Water
wedge?
Street, yeah, what is
Here?
that?
It's part of the village right of way.
But is it resort
Um,
motel or is it waterfront?
That's waterfront. So actually I did an overlay with the aerial. You can see right here,
Right.
it's in the waterfront. I didn't draw the base map for the existing zoning, but that's part of the village right of way there.
And if you take your cursor straight up across the street, there's a little, what is that?
So there's 4 West Water Street. There was a harbor committee approval of that. That was a single family house. And then there's a
Right.
restaurant marina here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't tell what the colors, the other map was really good that you had up a moment ago. Is that resort motel or is that,
It's
Waterfront.
the only resort motels are these 4 parcels that are on the south side of West Water Street here.
okay,
That's the only 4. No.
okay.
Can I ask a question? Kathy?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, so by Long Wharf, the 2 properties that are pink on the map you're showing, or the one property that's pink, yes, and then the one above that's blue, above it, is that a little strip?
That's
Yeah,
actually
what is
water. It's,
Oh, that's water, it just cuts in, okay.
yeah, it just cuts in and, and we've had some, this red outline is the historic district.
Mhm.
It's the overlay, the Village Historic Overlay District, which is, it's different than the National Register District. It's, but it's more encompassing, so that's good. I mean, we've had this discussion, zoning really applies to the land. So
Okay.
I was just asking if the Malloy building is considered waterfront.
it
On this
is in the VB district, the majority of it is, but if you kind of, see if I can zoom in a little bit. You can see that there's a strip along the waterfront,
Mhm.
along the shoreline. That's that other pink, which is the WF district.
Right. Oh, I see. There's a strip right there.
See, it's kind of, yeah. So this is where, a couple of those restaurants are down here.
Yeah,
along
but
the
not
water.
contingent to the wharf on the other side, on the left-hand side of the map. That little, the strip doesn't go down toward 114. It just goes horizontally across. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't that also be waterfront though?
We're not changing the underlying zoning district. So that's
okay.
what, this is the existing zoning map.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I don't know the history.
An overlay.
Pinks are confusing.
Goes
Yeah.
over all of the existing zoning districts. It's additional standards for development in the waterfront that are in addition to everything that's normally there. It's an
Okay.
overlay. Think of it like it's just an overlay.
Right.
over
I
what's
think
existing.
actually that's really important to hear, and I don't know that I've heard that before, that these same designations and the same boundaries, just like the use charts, have been in existence before. All you're doing is adding some, in some
Development.
cases restrictions, and maybe in some cases expansions of those.
Development, we're adding basically development standards
Okay.
for construction on the waterfront. That's what we're adding.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
A quick question for Liz and Fred. For there to be a finding of a project to qualify for this special exception use, does the application have to be in the overlay, have to be waterfront related or waterfront dependent?
No.
Okay.
It just
All right.
has to be over 3,500 square feet in gross floor area in the waterfront overlay district.
Yeah, it would be the same permitted uses. It's really just addressing a larger building size in those areas, but doesn't change, as Liz has said, I mean, the uses that are in the existing zoning districts remain, and this would apply, the special exception would apply regardless of what the underlying permitted uses are.
Right. And Fred, in your experience, I mean, we get, I've only been on the Harbor Committee for a few years, but does the special exception designation, how would that change the way that we consider any application? What additional sort of implications does that have for the approval process?
For the Harbor
any.
Committee?
Yeah, say for example.
I don't think it has any implications for the Harbor Committee. These are standards that the village board would have to consider as to whether or not they wanted to allow a building over 3,500 square feet. When it comes to the Harbor Committee, you're going to apply the same standards that are in Chapter 285 that you apply all the time. There's nothing in this law that changes the standards that you have to apply as the Harbor Committee.
Okay.
Fred, let
So-
me ask you a question on that though, because it seems to me that the setback requirement here of being a minimum of 30 feet conflicts with the wetlands law. It seems to me to anybody putting in an application, they're going to see that they're going to think that this is an exception to the wetlands law, setback rules.
Well, I would say two things about that. If you looked at the R20 district, and I don't have the code in front of me, there would be building setbacks there also that you would have for a building, 10-foot side yard, 50-foot front yard, 30-foot rear yard, whatever they happen to be. Those exist for every lot now. So again, the wetlands law is an addition, and it's the stricter requirement that applies. The one thing that Liz and I did have a discussion about, because I'm always wary of the attorney who's going to argue what you just said, that a sentence in this law that basically says that what we just said, and that is, in addition to what's in the overlay district, the provisions of chapter 285 apply. So that, somebody's not arguing that, well, this was adopted after the wetlands law, and
Supersedes it.
yeah, it is, it is not clear. And then you get into all of this, when zoning regulations aren't clear, they're in derogation of common law rights, and, they get interpreted in favor of the landowner. So, I think the intent of the law is clear, and that is it's the same as every other, with underlying zoning districts. The wetlands setbacks, the stricter setback always applies, but there's no harm in putting a sentence in there that chapter 285 applies in addition to the overlay district.
I would
think
agree
that
with that. I mean, when I
very
see
helpful.
this, which is the, it's like a summary, an introduction, it's got that in there, and it says, will advance the objectives of the Sag Harbor Comprehensive Plan. That's kind of interesting. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but down at the bottom of the second page, it says, any developed subject to the requirements of 285 will continue to require approval by the Harbor Committee for blah, 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 and maximum setbacks for any structure. So if that is not actually in this, is that what you're suggesting, Fred, that we might have like a
I'm
single line in there?
suggesting that a belt and suspenders is sometimes
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah,
Because under E, I mean, it clearly looks like that's an exception, because whereas in other cases, the setback is from the property line. In this case, it specifically says 30 feet from the mean high water line. And that would seem to be an exception to a setback from the wetlands or from the property line, et cetera. It just, the wording looks like it creates an exception.
Yeah, after all these years, I've learned that lawyers can make creative arguments, and whenever you can eliminate them, that's a good thing. The one I remember best is that I remember we were doing a farm stand law in the town of Southampton, where you would kind of say what could be sold at the farm stand. And a lawyer argued in justice court that somehow that violated the North American Free Trade Agreement. So, it never hurts to have a belt and suspenders, so.
okay.
I have another question. In terms of the map, I'm unclear as to why the two lines, one being the waterfront overlay district and the other being the historic overlay district, aren't the same, or maybe they're not meant to deviate. But for instance, at the base of the jetty, there's a significant deviation between the two.
Kathy, can you put the map up so we can see exactly?
Yeah,
what
I
you're
can
talking
tell
about?
you, we just followed the property lines when we created the, this map. When we created this boundary, that's the blue boundary, it follows property lines. Whereas the base map that we're using, which is this one, this is what we're starting with, and we're drawing on top of this, does not follow property lines. It's more of a, I don't know how they did this. So that's all I have to say about that.
What was
Sound
your
like Forrest
comment,
Gump.
Don?
Excuse me?
Don,
Well,
what was your comment?
Well, it appears to create waterfront areas that are not in the overlay district.
What do you mean? The red?
The blue is the overlay district. The red is
Right.
the historic overlay district.
Right.
And if you look, for instance, at the base of the jetty near Cor Maria, you'll see there's a significant variation where there's what appears to be land that's not in the overlay district.
This area here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not part of their parcel. So that's all, and actually it's not even zoned R20. So it's really just a matter of the base mapping of this.
So who owns that property, Kathy? Do you know? It doesn't belong to
I think
Cor Maria?
as far as the tax parcel goes, it does not belong to Cor Maria.
If that's the breakwater right there, then I think the village owns that.
Yeah.
Maybe, anyway.
Well, regardless, I would just think that the line for the overlay district, should go to, let's call it the shoreline, rather than leaving a possible parcel or argument that an area isn't covered by it.
Yeah, except that area doesn't have an underlying zoning district, so that adds another complication. See, if you look at it, it's not beige, it's white. It's not part of the R20 district either. So, but I don't know, there might be a way that we can write our ways around this. That, it applies to the upland area that's owned by, I don't know how to solve it.
Right. I think that's a really good point because
Yeah,
it would be a great place for.
I wouldn't want to get into a situation where, where a future upland owner is claiming it and claiming that because of the map that it clearly isn't in the overlay district. So it would just seem like the lines should match. And you'd have to go through a survey to tell whether it's actually existing or whether it's underwater, et cetera. But at least on the map, it appears to make an exception.
Okay. So the other thing that is on my mind is the height. And can you tell us, somebody succinctly, what the variations are in the heights that are being allowed along the waterfront and then also in the other areas? I know people took great exception to the model that was shown. I didn't think it was so bad for something that was done, as just sort of an example. And if it seemed that if everything were built to the maximum allowed, it could have a pretty heavy presence on the waterfront. Now, I know that one comment was that it didn't show the setbacks, but can somebody compare for us, because this is my big issue, I think, what the heights are that are permitted now versus what and where heights are permitted under this new zoning? Because a lot of the questions here in the LWRP review have to do with scenic and blah, 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 blah. So.
So I was just sharing my screen here, which is the table of dimensional requirements, dimensional regulations, attachment 2 of the zoning chapter. And these are the current maximum heights, 2 stories in all but VB, and a maximum of 35 feet across the board. And within the village business underlying district is 3 stories and 35 feet maximum.
And can you flip right back and show us exactly where the VB is? I have trouble keeping it in my head. I'm sorry.
That's the darker pink in here.
So that's Main Street, essentially.
Yep.
But
Okay.
this essentially means anything can be overridden, blown up to 35 feet.
Yeah, that's the current.
Okay, so that's current. What in the new overlay district is changing with that? Anything? Why is this, you give us like 10 feet and access to the waterfront and you get like more height? I know that's pretty crude, but can you just explain that to me?
So there is we're changing the base height for properties that are waterfront lots to 25 feet. That's how it reads now. And that any building that does achieve its full height under the zoning of the 35 feet would have to be stepped back to reduce the massing of the buildings by 10 feet. And then, yes, there is a trade-off for 35 for the larger properties, larger developments that are 3,500 100 square feet or greater, there's an opportunity to get public access onto private property. And as a trade-off, it is, they could achieve the full height under the zoning
But,
of
and
35
that's,
feet.
so can you with your cursor show us the areas that are going to be allowed to go to 35 feet that are outside of VB right now?
That are outside VB. So which properties? It's any
Well-
property where,
Which areas? Right now, the Main Street area could go to 35 feet under the present restrictions. But I think I just heard you say that with, different kinds of accommodations, other areas could also go to 35 feet.
It's VB and OD. Kathy.
Okay,
yes.
and can
Yeah.
you show us clearly what OD is? OD
It's
is,
in yellow here, yellow,
yep,
and in the dark pink. And it's really only for the areas along on the waterfront. These are waterfront lots where this would apply.
so those areas under this new code would be allowed to go to 35 feet. Now they're restricted to 25, but they would,
No, they could go to 35 feet. Currently, they could go to 35 feet. The proposed law has 25 feet for waterfront lots, but it allows that exception to go to the full height with the provision of public access
for which
So,
district? OD?
The whole,
within
the
the
whole
OD
thing,
and VB for waterfront lots.
the whole
So-
overlay.
Yeah,
May I interrupt for a second?
yeah.
So my question is, right now, what are those what's the height of those condominiums? The West Water Street ones, are those 35 feet?
No, they're higher.
Like
and they
46 feet, I think.
Okay, but
yeah.
An example of then putting the setback, if you've got a 35-foot tall building, would be similar to the way they've put the third story on those condos. Correct? If you have to have a setback for the top of the building. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I don't know that the condos are a great example because they're so much bigger in scale. And I think the top of them goes to 46, 47, 48 feet. And I think we're talking here of a situation where the max, I don't know if it includes mechanicals, but the max, the way it's stated, is 35 feet. But to get to 35 feet, where does the setback start, Kathy? At 25 feet, and then there's a 10-foot setback? How does that work?
I'm looking, I believe it's anything above 25 feet. Liz, is that correct, where the step back would occur?
Do we still have Liz?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay.
I'm not sure if it was specified. I think it's anything above the 25 feet would have to be stepped back
Okay.
after above 25 feet.
So you've got, it says there's no residential use in the business, correct?
So there's currently in the VB district and the office district, you can have an accessory apartment or an apartment building by special exception so the apartment building by special exception in the office district and accessory apartments in the VB district by special exception. Under this code, that would no longer be permitted for waterfront lots.
So I can't imagine that we would have a business in Sag Harbor that would worry.
I'm sorry, I
With
couldn't
what?
hear you.
But that means you couldn't, if whoever builds,
Lily, we're losing you. There was something you were saying about a
Can
business.
you hear me? Sorry,
Yeah,
my
much better.
Wi-Fi is
Yes,
going in.
yes. Okay.
So this means that any of these buildings, which is supposed to be now business, could be 35 feet, but with no living facilities. Is that correct?
This was to, it would be active uses, more publicly accessible uses on those waterfront lots. So they wouldn't be residences it wouldn't be an apartment building, or it wouldn't have apartments on the upper floors, or the VB district and the OD for waterfront lots only though.
So I guess that's my big issue. Like, one of my things is, so you build up Harbor Pets, but Harbor Pets, what business is going to be 3 stories tall or 2 stories tall? And this doesn't help any housing issues. Like, say if you do wamp up Harbor Pets to 2 stories, at least they could rent an apartment out and put housing in.
I'm sorry, I don't know where Harbor Pets is. I'm sorry.
Harbor Pets or Long Wharf or Dopo, it's along
Okay.
that area.
VFW.
So putting affordable apartments on Long Wharf.
No, not
No,
long.
on Bay Street,
Bay Street.
Bay
Or
Street.
anywhere
Say
in the
above-
overlay.
Yeah,
Anywhere in the,
So that would be permitted in the VB district and the OD district. I'll share again. So in the darker pink, you can have accessory apartments as a special exception use. But this overlay district would prohibit them on Long Wharf, basically anything north of Bay Street and Long Island Avenue. That's waterfront lots wouldn't be permitted to have accessory apartments or an apartment building.
Right,
So you wouldn't be able to build the condos, for instance.
right.
And in fact, let's go back to the map that is the proposed zoning. Oh, sorry, let me just stop sharing.
Kathy,
Yeah.
this is Will. I've mentioned this before, and I got to say that I really take exception to the notion that we can't put some type of apartment in north on the waterfront. As I mentioned before, deed restricted. Everywhere we hear a housing shortage issue for workers, et cetera. So here we have the opportunity to mitigate that by maybe 1 to 5 apartments along the waterfront. And we're cutting ourselves off by saying, no, that is not allowed. I know that a lot of people have a fear that this is going to be something a developer will find as a loophole, but I'm sure we can produce a document that says these apartments are related to the business. And I'm speaking specifically of the boatyards, some of which already have housing, I believe. I think Ship Ashore, the one that's just west of them, I think they have some type of housing.
Yeah,
So
I think there's a house that we have in front of Harbor Committee right now that's got a residential house, but it's zoned something else.
Yeah. And I know that there are other boatyards that are ready for huge renovations. And one of the issues that each one of those owners have discussed is the possibility of putting in some type of housing for employees. And I just think we're if you talk to Bob Plum and others about the shortage of housing, and one of the things he says is that there's no place to do it. Well, there is places to do it. If you look at Ship Ashore Marina, there, you can land 10 helicopters on the open space there. I know
that would be a different thing, though. I mean, right now in the WF district, you're not allowed to have residential at all. In the WF underlying district, that is the waterfront underlying district. The only place you're allowed to have accessory apartments or an apartment building is in the OD or in the VB, or you can have accessory apartments in the R20 as well. But
right,
I think that's a different, initiative. We wouldn't be taking it away from the waterfront district, with the proposed legislation. The only thing that we were including was this, not having luxury, basically what would everyone had felt would be luxury apartments on the waterfront. And so that except for on the actual waterfront lots, it would still be permitted by a special exception. So this whole area south of Long Island Avenue would be permitted to have accessory apartments or apartment buildings by special exception. So, I mean, I guess those are comments for the trustees. I mean, we're
Those are
meeting tonight.
policy issues that you should
Right.
address.
We're
with the
meeting
board.
about the coastal consistency, and I feel like we haven't touched that. So-
Well,
I have ZBA coming up, but
and
Yeah, I know.
you have more
Well,
questions?
right. So I think for me, a lot of it has to do with the height and the fact that there's, if I understand, and we've been discussing it, and I may still not understand, but the Village Business District has always had a height maximum of 35 feet. And we are extending that maximum conditioned on certain accommodations. And I am not sure that I'm comfortable signing off on some of the things here having to do with scenic, this, that, and the other, with that extension of a 35 height. I don't feel that those setbacks or these little, sidings between the buildings is going to offset that mass. And that's what I'm not comfortable with. And I think that there are other people in the village that also have that hesitation. So for me, I'd like to see where that settles out. I know that we're not deciders here. That's all going to be digested and manipulated at the trustee level. But having this setback and having like a sight line that's only going to be visible if you're like right in front of it, to me, does not offset having this third floor. Just me. So
I agree with you, Mary Ann.
It's a good point. Very good point.
And I think also, like, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're talking about the condos. So even look at the condos now and just knock off the top, whatever hot tub pool accessory on the top. That's huge.
yeah, it's big.
That's
So
35
let me
feet.
I just want to like put things a little bit. I mean, we are dealing with an existing code where we have a 35-foot height max in every one of the districts.
Yeah.
And the question is, if we are
Wait,
going to
let me
apply
stop
to-
you. Let me stop you,
Okay.
because when we looked at that chart, it said 25 feet except for VB.
No.
All
No,
There's a
35
max
feet.
height in every
Two
existing
stories.
max height in every existing zoning district in the village is 35 feet.
Can you put that chart back up again? I'm so sorry.
Oh.
I know you're gonna need a big, long
So
drink.
this code, this provision of the code will actually restrict height on waterfront lots in the waterfront overlay district. And it allows the 35 feet and 3 stories in OD and VB only
Right,
if they give public access.
right. And so.
Which is
because it
actually, all of
just-
that, the whole concept is from the prior law. I don't know how far this board got in reviewing the prior law, but that's where this all came from.
We never got there.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
they didn't, but
Okay.
I mean, so,
Okay,
an
so let me,
opportunity to get public access on private property has always been a challenge. I mean, you were successful in getting it on 4 West Water Street, and I commend you for getting
So-
that.
But there really
It's very
isn't
difficult.
public.
let me follow up on my question from what Liz just said. So right now, and I'm sorry, I'm a slow learner. Right now, every part of this village can go to 35 feet, but it's only in the VB that it can be a 3-story 35-foot
Correct.
building. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what is changing now? So now all it's saying, it's like the limit is still 35 feet. It's
Mhm.
just that if some of these areas want to go to 35 feet in a 3-story format, they have to have like the setback and they have to have the sight lines.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm understanding?
In VB and OD only.
Okay, so in RM, if they want to go to, are they going to be allowed to do 3 stories at 35
No.
feet?
No.
Okay,
Just VB and OD.
So the office district, what it's allowing the office district to go to 3 stories and 35 feet.
Yeah,
Not 2 stories.
3 stories, right? 1, 2,
Yep.
3.
it says that, yep.
Okay.
OD and VB only, in the waterfront overlay district only.
And it's, yeah, okay.
The waterfront lots are restricted, the waterfront lots are restricted to 25 feet.
Okay. That's very helpful. And perhaps it was all there in plain English, but it didn't come through for me.
Are we still required to give a response within 30 days?
Unless extended by mutual consent.
Excuse me?
Unless extended by mutual consent.
That's what I'm asking, is whether there is going to be consent to extend it.
I would have to ask the board. I don't get to say yes or no.
Well, I thought you might have,
Well-
that they might have considered it by now.
No. I can ask them though. I'm happy to do.
All right.
So the
Okay,
question for the Harbor Committee might be, do we want to ask the board for an extension of time?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's things, maybe Liz, you know the answer to this, but I think a lot of issues were brought up at the, whatever it was, the meeting or the work session. And I don't know how some of those have,
Yeah, the board may respond to those, certainly.
Right. Right.
There were changes that were requested, I'm sure.
So
Just
give us a
different board
count
members.
back. So we have with Suffolk County until the end of February, right? And they have 30 days. And so we really, in my mind, we need to wrap this up by New Year's Eve. And we're like sitting here 6 weeks out from that. And we have the holidays in between. So when is the next meeting of the Board of Trustees? When do you expect to see a new version of the overlay district? Or
Well,
will there not be a new one?
Yeah, it depends if they want changes, if the board wants changes. The next meeting, I think, is December 7th.
I had it as the 14th. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the second
it's also
Tuesday,
me.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the first,
14th.
I'm looking at the 30th. Yep, you're right. It's the 14th. Sorry. For December 1st is a Wednesday. I don't know why I thought it was Tuesday. Okay, yeah, December 14th.
Right.
And
Was there not talk of having another work session between now and then?
I don't know. I'll have to ask them.
And our next meeting is December 2nd, I think, just.
Right, right.
I mean, by then you'll know what the plan is. I don't
Right.
know.
Doris, can you tell us when our 30 days are up?
Let me check.
I think it was just before that. I think we asked that at the last meeting, and it was, I think this was from the 28th of October, if I'm not mistaken, 28th, 29th.
That's for the consistency review?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's 30 days from the day it was referred, so.
I think at the last meeting, it was said it was referred, it was either the 28th or 29th.
Do none of these documents have a date on them or stamp on them? The introduction has got October 27th, but that doesn't mean it was handed to us then. I don't know. How does that get established, Liz, when we were given it?
It should have been referred to you by the clerk's office. Maybe there's an email Doris has.
Last time Doris said it was 11/2 that she received it.
She did look at that, right?
Yeah. Or she sent it to us. I think she received it the Friday before.
Right.
Sent it
Oh,
to us.
So I don't know if it's the same, if the referral is the same as the date that we had finished the coastal consistent, the assessment form and sent it around. I don't know how that works in the code. I think it's actually the date of its referral.
So maybe rather than trying to like split the legal hairs on that, we should notify the Board of Trustees that we're going to need some matter of extension because we haven't reached a firm conclusion right now. And our next meeting is December 2nd.
Yes.
Fourth, right? No, second.
But yeah. There's a lot of unknowns here, or at least a few, whether or not there's going to be a work session, whether or not there's going to be any changes to what we have in front of us now. I'm really grateful for the time that we've spent here because I understand it much better than I did before. So Fred, what would you advise here?
Well, the next meeting is, I guess my initial question would be, as far as asking for an extension, are you contemplating that you would make a recommendation on consistency at the December 2nd meeting?
We could try.
Yeah,
So you would, if the 30 days, I don't know the answer to this, but if the 30 days happens to run out before December 2nd, and based on what I'm hearing, I suspect that it is, I think you would want to at least request an extension of time to the December 2nd meeting, so you would have time to make a referral, a recommendation, I should say.
okay. And December 2nd is the Thursday after Thanksgiving. So
Yeah,
probably unlikely that the trustees would have a work session before that. But let's at least ask for that, right?
yeah, I would think that would be it. Take it one meeting at a time here. You can,
Yeah.
I think your time runs out before December 2nd, so at least get an extension, request an extension until December 2nd.
And how do we do that? Do you do that for us, Fred?
Well, I think the board by motion should make that request, and that can get referred to the village board, and Liz is here and
Yeah, I'll
she'll
tell
let them know too. And, that should handle it.
Mhm.
Fred,
But I
can
would do it by motion. I would do it by motion of the board.
Fred,
make
could
the
I
request.
suggest that possibly we could include language if we're requesting at least until after our next meeting, or a later date if the proposal is materially changed. In other words, if the proposed statute is materially changed by the board, then we
Yeah,
have an opportunity to review that.
I'd keep it simple and just ask for December 2nd. If the local law, and I'm, Liz will correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's a substantial change in the local law, it's going to require the village board to notice it
Renotice.
again. And you would have to, it would start the whole process all over again anyway. So I don't think we should presuppose what, if anything, the village board might do with regard to the local law. I think if we just, first things first would just be to at least get to the next meeting to be able to potentially make a decision.
So, all right, one other issue, and we all, I think, agreed that it would be good to slip something in here under E, reiterating that this is all still subject to chapter 285.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, I'll bring that
Liz and I have
back.
discussed
Yeah,
that. I
yes.
think, and that, by the way, I don't think either of us would consider that to be a substantive change.
No.
Okay, but how do we get that, how do we make that happen?
I'll propose it as one of the changes requested to the board.
Okay,
Liz, also, I'd have to read over this carefully, but I think there are a couple of spots where there may be some confusion in terms of the reference to front, because waterfront, the front is the water side, and elsewhere the front is the street side. And I think there's a couple of places where it says waterfront and then it says front, and there could be confusion as to which it's referring to.
Can you email me those
I'd have
spots?
to look at it carefully, but
Yeah.
going over it, it seems
I'll
like.
look at it again too. Thank
Yeah,
you.
because that's a sort of common confusion as to,
Okay. So can I have a motion, please, that we ask Fred to draw up a, I don't know, a note, a letter to the village board requesting that we get an extension on our deliberations here until the date of our next harbor committee meeting, which is December 2nd?
do you
I'm happy-
do you need another couple of days? Because if you're going to submit something, you're not going to be able to submit it on the day of the harbor committee meeting.
Why?
Well,
Because
the board has to act by then. That's the 30 days. So, I think December 2nd is fine.
In other words, we don't have to actually submit it to them. We just have to act by then.
Yeah, you have to act on your recommendation. Listen, if you
You have
wanted to
to
make
make
it
a
December
recommendation.
3rd so that Doris could refer to the village the next day, that would be fine too, if you want to make it December 3rd.
Okay. So may I have a motion to extend our period for evaluation and recommendation here until December 3rd, 2021?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I'll draft a letter, circulate it to you, Mary Ann, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
All
everybody.
right. Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was really helpful. And I hope we weren't too exasperating.
Well, you were.
I was, huh?
No,
All right,
we were.
let's
We
let
were.
Liz go. Liz has to go get a
Night,
bite to
everybody.
eat and maybe a
Take
drink
care.
before her next meeting. All right, thank you.
Take
Good
care.
night,
guys.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Hi, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good
Are
night.
we ending the meeting then?
Everybody's gone, but you, Doris, and I, John. I think
I
Lily's
guess
still
so.
here,
It
too.
was-
So, all
I
right,
didn't hear a formal motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm still here.
Good night.
it's